Hey there. What would happen if somebody gave you a 100% efficient EV, 100% efficient motors, drivetrain, inverter? How far would its range be? See, I know people who would think that its range would be infinite. That's not true. And we need to talk about this. We also need to talk about why the Tesla Model 3 is more efficient than the VW ID.3 and where this comes from. I also would like to tackle the Mercedes Vision EQXX media marketing prototype for efficiency and whether it's actually impressive. Then, as a bonus, in the end, we'll need to talk about the Tesla Semi and if that actually is as efficient as Musk claims. And if so, why? So, I'm Dieter. I'm a chief engineer from Germany in the automotive world, and I've read so many posts on LinkedIn and saw YouTube videos that I thought I'd have to pitch in. Before we jump into the physics of all of it, we need to agree on the same driving comparison for vehicles. And driving comparison means drive cycle. So all vehicles drive the same way, and then energy is measured for this way of driving. This is called a drive cycle. I know that many people would like the stickers of cars to represent real world driving. The problem is there is no such thing because your driving is different from my driving and it's different from other people's driving. With all the flaws drive cycles have, like the EPA cycle in the US and the WLTC here in Europe, we need to agree on something. In this video, we'll use the WLTC. This is the Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicle Drive Cycle, and this works like this. First, you start in the city driving, so you go speed over time. You first go like 40 kilometers an hour, then you stop at some traffic lights, you slow down a lot, maybe there's traffic, then you go outside of the city, you drive up to 80, 90 kilometers an hour, and after a final stop, you go for a part of the Autobahn up to 130 kilometers an hour. We drive all cars like this, like OEMs or car manufacturers drive them. They measure the energy they use for that drive, and then they normalize this for 100 kilometers. So the efficiency is measured as energy used, kilowatt hours, per given distance, 100 kilometers. What we need to talk about now are the 4 key driving resistances, or the 4 key energy drains while driving. I know that you probably figured out the first one. Everybody's talking about the first one, that's aerodynamic drag. I know everybody's talking about it, but we still need to tackle this in a little bit more details because there are important things hiding in that. The next thing, and that's not very many people know that's rolling resistance. Yes, your tires, while they're rolling on the road, while the rubber is moving, that costs energy. Almost nobody guesses electric consumption. That's when your screens are on, your control units are on, your fans are blowing, your pumps are pumping coolant through the battery and the electric motors. All of this costs energy, and it's significant. Then finally, you know that acceleration costs energy and braking costs energy. Well, recuperation in EVs gets you energy back, and in petrol cars, well, you get just nothing back. This is clear, and acceleration is giving in the drive cycle, so we'll stick to the drive cycle for this, and we'll not evaluate is aggressive driving a lot worse or not. Let's talk about aerodynamics. Aerodynamics means that a car, while it's driving, needs to push air out of the way. And that's actually quite a complicated thing because you typically use computational fluid dynamics or CFD to compute the Navier-Stokes equations, and the computers calculate how the air exactly is moving around the car. All of this is a tiny bit too complicated for this video. So we will use the simplified drag equation. To use the simplified equation, we need to rely on car manufacturer data. Car manufacturers put their car into a wind tunnel, they blow wind across that car, and the car sits on pressure plates. And while the wind blows across it, the car is pushed back on these plates, and we measure the force. Then they use this drag equation and compute the drag coefficient. Before we come to the drag coefficient, let me explain the rest of the equation real quick. A means the cross-sectional car when you look at it from the front. So the bigger the car, when looked at it from the front, the more air it needs to move out of the way. The second term rho means air density, or how heavy the air is. This also means that in the wintertime, when the temperatures drop, air becomes more dense as the air contracts. And then actually efficiency goes down, and actually you need more energy to drive the car in the wintertime through the air than, let's say, in the summertime. The next term is velocity squared. All of this scales with velocity squared. If you want to know why and where this comes from, why was velocity squared, leave a comment down below. I'll make a short video explaining this. I don't think we have the time here. Finally, the car manufacturer computes the drag coefficient. Because this equation is such a simplified equation, this coefficient accounts for the car's shape. Different shapes have different drag coefficients. Here's a list of drag coefficients. The lower this coefficient, the more slippery it is, the easier it pushes the air out of the way. Let's focus on the cube shape for a second here. That has a very large drag coefficient of around 1. However, I want to argue that this shape is the most efficient shape for a car. Not efficient, but useful. So you can seat a lot of people in a cube-shaped car. That's a bus. You can transport a lot of goods with that car. That's a delivery van. So the cube shape is the most useful thing. And if you think that cars should also be useful, you need to kind of cater to the cube shape. On the other end of the spectrum, there's the streamlined body or streamlined half body. Let's call it the teardrop shape or half teardrop. Those are the most efficient shapes, and I'm using the half body because that's easier to put wheels under it. And most cars that want to be very efficient want to approach that shape. Problem with that is not very useful, is it? Yeah, you could sit probably in the front, but even behind you, maybe small people could sit. And where would you put your luggage? You cannot transport a lot of goods with that. So this is no good for an Amazon delivery van. I want to convey to you that a low drag coefficient is not something that, only innovative engineers from great companies will make cars with low drag coefficients. No. A drag coefficient is the result of a compromise between the usefulness of a car and the fun shape of a car. Here's a fun shape of a car. That's the Aptera. They actually wanted to make it a teardrop shape. And I love it. This is great. But it's not very useful. You wouldn't take your family on a Christmas vacation in this. You wouldn't even go shopping with this thing for like a week's worth of groceries. This is a fun thing. It's a quirky thing. You take this out on the weekend and feel happy with it. But notice that even the small wheel covers, the linkages, and the mirrors make this thing a drag coefficient of 0.13 a lot worse than the half streamlined body even. So it's very difficult to get a drag coefficient value of below 0.2. If somebody comes to you and says, I have just created a car with a drag coefficient of below 0.2, you should immediately go, I don't think that's a very useful car. I think that's a hobby car. That's a quirky car. So the 0.2 is around the threshold of normal car that is useful for like 5 people sitting in it and fun. Fun is great. Let's talk about rolling resistance. When a tire under a car rolls, when it touches the road, it's flat. When it's not touching the road, it gets round again. This means the rubber constantly flexes. This flexing costs energy. And this is called rolling resistance. And tire manufacturers measure their rolling resistance of their tires by placing them on a large steel drum, rotating this large steel drum. They put the tire on an axle and push the tire against that drum, which represents the weight of the car, and then they measure the force by which the tire wants to deflect. Now you might ask, that's all fine and dandy, but when you want to buy a tire, how do you know if it's efficient or not? I don't know about your country, but in the EU, there's a tire label. So every tire, every size of tire, and every brand of tire needs to have this label. And this label consists of a tire efficiency scale, a wet grip scale, noise scale, if it's a snow tire or an ice tire. Let's focus first on the tire efficiency scale. So A means most efficient, rolls with the least amount of force necessary, and E is worst. And you might rightly ask the question, if you buy tires, why would you buy anything else than the most efficient A tire if it saves you energy? And the answer to that is similar like the aerodynamic resistance. This is a compromise. See, A tires have very high sidewalls and very soft sidewalls, so it doesn't take a lot of energy to compress them. This has negative effects. Negative effects like steering feel. They feel mushy and uncontrollable. Negative effects like grip. They typically have less wet grip and less dry grip. So there's a compromise between ease of rolling and safety and driving fun. Typically, A tires are not the best, but still okay. B tires stand to be a reasonable compromise, but if you want a sporty tire, something that you can have really fun with, you have to look at D tires, maybe even E tires. So what are those coefficients? The EU gives us this table, and C1 tires are car tires, C3 tires are semi-truck tires. We will use those later for the Tesla Semi. And from A to E, the rolling coefficients are given. And we plug this into this equation. The equation works like this. The higher the weight of the car, M times G, the more rolling resistance. And then you multiply this by the rolling coefficient. So the heavier the car, the higher your rolling resistance will be. The constant power draw, I will assume that your car in the on condition for the control units, the screens, everything that is on, the pumps, the fans, will use 1000 watts. One exception, I will use 700 watts for the EQXX because I think they will shut everything off. They don't need to do their tests. Finally, I know that you know that F equals M times A for acceleration. I'm not going to explain this. What I want to show, though, is I need to have an assumption for drivetrain. And the drivetrain assumption I do very simple. By and large is good enough. We use a constant efficiency for the battery of 95%, constant efficiency for the inverter of 95%, constant efficiency for the motors of 95%, and a 2% energy loss in the transmission. This gives us an overall drivetrain efficiency in average for our driving cycle of 84%. So I've looked up all the things necessary to do our little simulation with the 4 forces and our assumption of constant drive efficiency. And let's start with the Tesla Model 3 long range. Tesla Model 3 long range, 1830 kilograms, pretty good drag coefficient, but above 0.2. It still seats 5 people. It has a trunk in the back, a trunk in the front. It's fine. I gave it B tires. Let's check out the website. When you change actually tire height of the Model 3, it gives you an additional range. And that's significant range. So I assume it uses B tires. Also Michelin, pretty good tires. Energy use 14.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Pretty good. Plugging all of this into our little simulation with our 4 forces, 14.5. That's an error of 1.56%. That's very low. Seems like we're on the right track. Let's look at the VW ID.3 Pro S version. That's 1930... What? What?
This is all wrong.
Why is this so heavy? VW, why so heavy? There's no reason for this to be so heavy. Look, you even only use one motor. You have no motor in the front. A motor plus gearbox plus housing plus inverter plus coolant lines plus high voltage lines, that's probably around 75 kilos. You don't have that. The Tesla has that. And then you have skinnier tires. The tires alone, per tire, probably save a kilo or 2. So actually, it's not 100 kilos too heavy. It's probably 180 kilos too heavy.
How dare you?
What you doing? I can't explain that. I hope there's a great reason for this. I don't know why. What I can tell you, though, why, is why its drag coefficient is so much worse than the Teslas. Look, the drag coefficient is 0.267. And that's a lot worse than 0.21. Why? Well, it's not the engineer's fault. It's not like VW engineers don't know what they're doing. Rather, it's the marketing department's fault. See, in Europe, hatchbacks are a cool thing. Everybody likes hatchbacks, and VW has a heritage with hatchbacks with the VW Golf. So I'm reasonably sure, I don't know, of course, but the marketing department says when we make an EV, we need to make it a hatchback. Unfortunately, hatchbacks approach box-like shapes because the rear hatch is not horizontal, is vertical. So because of this, it has a high drag coefficient. The Mercedes EQXX. This is also somewhat on the heavy side that I cannot explain, has a very low drag coefficient of below 0.2. So in the next slides, we will ask the question, is that a usable car? Or is it a fun car? I had to estimate the blue things. I'm estimating the cross-section area of 1.8 square meters, and I'm estimating the tires based on what I saw in a video of CarWow. It uses 185 millimeter wide tires, very skinny, very high sidewall tires. They claim an energy use of below or at 10 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, but it's never really clear, do they mean the WLTC? Nevertheless, plugging all that into our simulation, we get 10.5. That's an error of 5%. So it seems like all of our assumptions are quite good. And with these, as a little bonus, here's a Golf diesel. You can pause the video and look at it in your own time. Having all of this, we basically have now a good foundation to ask questions. The first rule of thumb, I have 4 rules of thumb prepared for you. The first rule of thumb is what would happen if somebody would make a 100% efficient drivetrain. Let's put this 100% efficient drivetrain into the Tesla Model 3. Let's also give the Tesla Model 3 the very nice A tires efficiency and simulate it. Well, I get 10.2 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So if the motors, the inverters, and all of that would be perfect, I only go to 10, not below that. I don't get to 0. Why doesn't it use 0 energy if it's 100% efficient? Well, because the tires still need to flex the rubber, because there's still air that needs to be pushed out of the way. All of that uses energy. It just doesn't use more energy than necessary because of the less than 100% efficient drivetrain. This means the rule of thumb is that about 10 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers for a reasonable, usable car, a car that seats like 5 people and has luggage space, we will not get below 10 kilowatt hours. That's a limit. That's a physical limit. Rule of thumb number 2. How do the forces stack up? So now that we have a verified simulation with drag, rolling resistance, acceleration, and electronic use, how much is what? Here's the result. You see, aerodynamic drag is significant, but not so much more than anything else. It's just about as significant as rolling resistance. And if you do the acceleration and the constant electronics use together, let's assume they're about as high, because we want to have a rule of thumb. Rule of thumbs need to be useful, not perfectly accurate. And our useful rule of thumb is aerodynamic drag and rolling resistance, and acceleration plus offset electronic use is just about the same. The blue lines on this indicate the 100% efficient drivetrain. Please note that it doesn't use more aerodynamic resistance, but the motors of a less 100% efficient drivetrain use more battery power to overcome the resistances than the resistances themselves are. That's why the blue lines are below the white ones. Okay, rule number 3. If somebody would come to me and says, Dieter, you're an automotive engineer. Can you make a super efficient EV for the media to wow the journalists? I would say, yeah, journalists don't know that much. I can wow them. I will do it like this. I will make a tiny car, and I will ask the design department to go like, can you make this appear like a big car on photos? And they're like, yeah, no problem, no problem. So I will make a very short car. And that's what it is. Look, I've overlaid the VW Golf on this. And the VW Golf is not a big car. It's the average mid-sized car in Europe, and the Americans would even claim this to be a tiny car. The roofline is a lot lower. Then it even slopes down quite aggressively. So in the rear, nobody's sitting there. I would not give it rear doors, but then the design department would be like, or the marketing department, oh, it needs rear doors, so it's more in line with the appearance of our brand. And I would be like, yeah, I'll fake rear doors. I can't be bothered because nobody can sit in there anyway. So I'll fake rear doors. Also, I would give it very, very small and skinny tires. The best I could find. And then the design department would be, oh, but it needs to look like sporty tires. I was like, no problem. Let's paint a white line on the rubber so it looks like the rims are larger and it appears sportier. And they would all be like, yeah. And that's what they did. See, the Mercedes Vision EQXX, I think it's a beautiful car. I love the shape of it. Reminds me of the Aston Martin DB5 for whatever reason. It's beautiful, but it has very skinny tires. Probably, I've not driven it, but probably it doesn't go around a corner very quickly. It has a single motor with a top speed of 140. It looks sporty. It really isn't. Rule of thumb number 4. What about constant speeds? How much is what energy used at what speed? Let's find out. I've plotted constant speeds on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we will be plotting how much energy is used by what force. Now, we will not be accelerating here, nor slowing down, so acceleration is out of the picture. The first I've shown rolling resistance. Now, in theory, rolling resistance slightly increases with increasing speeds because of slip increase and all of that. I'm ignoring this. We're doing it by and large approximation here. The electronic use, or the constant power draw, actually contributes a lot at lower speeds. So when you're watching Netflix and there's a traffic jam, your monitor and Netflix use up a lot of energy. If you're not moving very fast and you want to travel 100 kilometers, you take a long time, and the longer you take to travel, the more energy your constant power draw will be. So if those two, tires and electronics, would be the only two energy drains, then it would mean that driving faster to where you want to go is the better idea for energy. Unfortunately, there is aerodynamic drag. And since drag increases squarely with velocity, we get punished for driving very fast. But what's the best speed? What's the optimal speed you should drive? In this case, well, in this assumption, and there are simplifications in our assumptions, the result is 40 kilometers an hour. That's the best speed. That's not so bad. So our city driving limits are 50 kilometers an hour. So in average, you're probably driving 30 kilometers an hour because of traffic lights and traffic and all of that. That's not so bad. But what if the city government is the Green Party and they want you to drive even slower because they think that this will use less energy? Well, if you're driving EVs, and even more so for petrol vehicles, that's worse. If you have a speed limit of 30, your average speed will be 20 or maybe even lower. At 20, you're using 10 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. You might as well be driving 75. That's how bad this is. So remember this. The next thing, people often say, oh, your energy use goes up square with speed. No. Aerodynamic drag goes up square with speed. The overall energy use is more forces than just drag. Let's do a little comparison. Let's pick 80 kilometers an hour. Let's say that's 11 kilowatt hours. Double that, and we're at 160. Well, at 160, let's say it's 24. That's slightly more than a factor of 2. That's not a factor of 4. So claiming that, oh, the energy increases with factor of 4 and we should all drive slowly, no, it does not increase with a factor of 4. It does so at much higher speeds when rolling resistance becomes insignificant compared to aero. But at normal speeds that we're driving at, energy is nowhere near square with speed. Nowhere near. Please remember this. Okay. Lastly, I promised you the Tesla Semi. Let's do the Tesla Semi. Now, I will not be driving the Tesla Semi in the WLTC because that's meant for cars, for passenger cars. There's a version for trucks. I'll not be doing this. I'll be looking at constant driving speeds. And Musk claims, and first of all, fully loaded, 37 tons, metric tons, or 82,000 pounds. Very good aero coefficients. I got that off the internet. Good job, Tesla. And we will see that this is the key reason for its low energy use. I also found 10 square meters roughly for the Tesla Semi. And Musk claims, or Tesla claims, a 2 kilowatt hour per mile energy use. Let's translate that for kilowatt hour per 100 kilometers. And we end up at 124. Now let's look at the tires and aero resistance. And you can see the tires are the main contributions, although I'm not using the most efficient tires. So I'm trying to be on the safe side. This simulation is on the using more energy than it probably does side. Tires are a significant portion of energy drain for trucks, for semis. And you can see that the electricity use, the constant power draw, becomes absolutely insignificant at somewhat meaningful speeds. And using all of this and looking up the 124 kilowatt hour per 100 kilometer energy draw, you see that this is 66 miles an hour. And I believe this is what it was optimized for. I think that on the interstates in the US, trucks will drive around 65 miles an hour, maybe up to 70. This is where they look to optimize it. And this is what I also got. This is completely plausible. I even still assume the 84% drivetrain efficiency. That's probably very wrong. If I would be Tesla, I would optimize the hell out of it for 65 miles an hour. This thing is probably approaching 88, 89, 90% efficiency at that speed. So this is even being overly conservative here. Allegedly, Bill Gates and the CEO of Daimler Trucks said, oh, this is impossible and this is not in the physical realm, and Musk is full of it. No, I can't believe how anyone would not believe those numbers. Those are very normal numbers. You don't even need a genius team of engineers to achieve that. You do need very, very good engineer to make the aero resistance so low. And this is the key of Tesla. It's not the 3 motors. It's not the clutch. It's not the fancy 1,000-volt powertrain. It's the low aerodynamic drag coefficients of 0.36. That's where it's at. If you've stayed this long, and this is already like half an hour, thank you so much. If you liked it, if you learned something, leave a like. If you want to see anything else, I have more ideas about correcting, journalists. Leave a comment what you want to see. If you did not like it, give me an up yours. I'll take that too. And other than that, I hope it was somewhat entertaining, and I hope you feel like you know more about EV efficiency than before. And the main point is, if some guy comes along and wants to pull the wool over your eyes, like a car manufacturer or a journalist or stuff like this, hopefully the content in this video made sure that it's not so easy to cheat you because you've watched this. If I've achieved that even slightly, awesome. Thank you so much for watching. and stay safe.